All right, well, it's past time, and you know, I don't like that, so. I'd like to call to order the Board of Education meeting for Monday, September 28th. We have all board members present, with Ryan Osmus joining by phone. I need, first off, an adoption of the agenda.
A second.
All right, we've got a motion by Jamie and a second by Tammy. All in favor?
Aye.
7-0. Okay, next up is the consent agenda, which includes the approval of personnel, including the supplemental personnel report. It's kind of a long one. Approval of minutes for the September 14th board meeting. Approval of the corrected minutes for August 24th board meeting. Approval of site council memberships for 2020, 2021 for Lynn, Sunnyside, and Dodge City Middle School. Approval of the certified evaluation handbook, that's our second reading. Approval of the 2020, 2021 classified development handbook revisions. Approval of second revision to the Bright Beginnings Early Childhood Student Handbook. Approval of Russell Child Development Building Blocks Grant Award for Bright Beginnings. And finally, the approval of Bright Beginnings Early Childhood Child Care Parent Handbook.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay.
I'll second.
We've got a motion by Pamela and a second by Tammy. All in favor?
Aye.
You meant Tracy.
Why am I called her Tracy? Okay, yes, sorry. Pamela and Tracy, not Tammy. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, consent agenda passed 7-0. Next up, we are ready for the approval of change in the operations plan. Sean?
Good afternoon, everybody. On page 7 of the operations plan is where we cover temperature checks. And at this meeting, what we're looking to do is to remove the temperature checks from the schools, and that would include also on page 22 concerning the indoor activities. They had asked, or we had been doing temperature checks, and we would like to remove those. On the consideration sheet, I had put.
Sean, I'm sorry. Could you move the mic up? There you go. Thank you.
I heard this was up on the stage earlier, so Carrie said I would be the only one to be able to. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. On the consideration sheet, I had said after Governor Kelly did not extend the Executive Order 2059 that required temperature checks in public schools, we're asking to remove the temperature and symptom screening section from page 7 and page 22. That Clayton brought it to our attention that executive order actually did not get stopped. It wasn't extended, but it's to continue running until we're no longer under a disaster declaration or whatever with the state. However, we would still like to remove that. The CDC has come out now and said that they do not recommend that you do temperature checks and screenings at schools, K-12 schools. Our Ford County Director, Angela Sowers, has also said that she is not in favor of it. Dr. Trotter is not in favor of doing those. And the reasoning is because we're gathering kids up too much to do the temperature checks, and they're afraid it's spreading through those kids. Clayton also checked with the county. Ford County has opted out of Executive Order 2059, and that gave you the right as a board to opt out. At the time when we started this whole operations plan, we felt like we should continue to do the masks and the temperature checks. However, we're not seeing a big benefit from the temperature checks. I've had reports, which most everything gets reported to me. I've had reports of 2 cases where a kid was sent home with a temperature, and neither one of those kids tested positive for COVID. So we're not seeing a big benefit out of it, and so that's why we're asking to remove it from the operations plan.
Sean,
Yes.
what are our COVID numbers doing? Are they increasing or decreasing?
Our positive cases, I brought that with me because I thought somebody might ask. We're staying right around 20 total staff and students with positive cases and active positive cases. So in other words, some people have been positive and they go off when they're finished with their quarantine. So that's why it's staying in that area. On Friday at 4 o'clock, and this is posted on the website, on the school website as well, we had 9 students and 12 staff members who were positive, active positive cases. And we've been staying right around that area.
And other 6A schools, are they, in the state, are they checking temperatures, schools of this size?
It's kind of split. Some are and some are not. And
I can address that.
Okay.
Mic on. There are many schools that are checking temperature. There are many schools that are not. They're using the same provision that we're talking about. If they're not, some schools have purchased thermometers and sent them to everyone's home and asked them to check the temperature at home. Some schools have just talked about the importance of the wellness screening with your child before you send them to school. I do not want this to happen here, but this is what Garden City is doing. They gave it as an option to their schools, and 3 of their schools chose to continue with temperature checks. And I found it interesting that the high school and 2 of their elementary schools continued at least to the end of this month. They're going to review it again, is what they said. And so there's a mix of everything. This is not a do or die situation. It's just a situation where at Cabinet we were discussing the fact that we're spending a lot of resources, we're spending a lot of time, and we're not seeing many results. We want safety. We believe we have to do what is best. A comment that I've heard is teachers have really grown fond of having that one-on-one or that eye contact time with the child. My comment to that is I hope we learn a lesson and go out of our way to make one-on-one eye contact without a thermometer in our hand. Because I think there is value in that, and I think it's critical in education that we build those relationships. I don't know that we're serving the purpose, but here's the other side of the coin. We're not the flu season yet. And will there be more fevers? Yes, there will be more fevers. I believe during flu season doesn't necessarily mean it's COVID. And so I don't know that I was as prepared as I should have been when I brought this forward, and I appreciate the work Sean has done. There is some kickback from some people, I found out after the agenda came out, which is how that works. But that's okay. I want the board to give input, and ultimately it's your plan too. So this was our recommendation. I felt good about it at the time, and that's the information to answer your question.
So, Sean, you're saying that since the start of school, we've tested temperatures every morning of every student and staff coming in the building, and we've found 2 people with a temperature.
That is correct. That's what's been reported to me. Now,
let's ask Tammy and Matt. Have you heard from your principals anything different?
I did check with Angela Sowers this morning with the health department because I wanted to make sure before I came and said, I've only had 2 reported to me. I said, what are you seeing? Are you seeing kids with temperatures who are also testing positive? And she said they've had very few like what we have. What they're seeing is when they are having a temperature, it ends up being strep right now. So a lot of kids are coming down with strep or something other than COVID.
I've never been a fan of the temperature checks anyway, so I'm delighted that we're not going to do it.
I would disagree.
I know.
It's the only measurable symptom that, out of all the stack of symptoms they are, it's literally the only one you could measure out of all of them.
maybe it's a change in tactics. Obviously, people are congregating at the front door, standing in line to get it done. We could use a different tactic and do it by classroom, but as the season goes on, I mean, you can't measure a sore throat or a sniffle to see what it is. At least a temperature, you can start asking those additional questions. Being that they're in the classroom cohort all day together anyway, maybe that would be a little bit easier to do. I think if we've already taken all these measures after living in a scenario with people for 24 hours for over 2 weeks, we did temperatures multiple times a day. And when we did have somebody pop up with a temperature, there's a process, which we have. So I just caution that if we don't do it at all, it takes away from having that measurable thing. But there could be certainly a better tactic, and we do it by classroom and not at the front of a building. And we're not slowing down the flow of kids into their classroom.
But there's no science. I mean, nobody's given us any science that it's a measurable thing, but it's not a predictable thing.
Even if we're catching flu, as we go into flu season, you mentioned strep throat, flu, those kinds of things, that's still a positive thing.
Yeah, but we've had the
catch it.
flu for 100 years, for hundreds of years. And I just think, well,
I've kind of thought the same thing, and I thought if you did not approve removing these, that we do need to look at different ways to do it, that might work better. This is not, if a kid is sick or has some other type of symptoms, this doesn't say that when they go to the nurse, they still can't have their temperature taken. That can still happen. We're just saying we're not seeing a big benefit to temperature checking everyone right now.
Yeah, and I think I kind of agree with Jeff. We're not checking for the flu and strep, we're checking for COVID.
No,
But it's a product of
Right.
what we're doing, and I think that would be, what our motivation would be the stopping the spread of something. But I would say, obviously, by our numbers and our population, we've done very well as far as spread. The only feedback I got from anybody on this agenda item was from teachers saying that they want us to continue temperature checks. But other than that, hadn't received any feedback. I don't know if anybody else had.
I had the same teachers. I had a couple teachers express wanting to continue, but just two, so I don't know how representative that is.
I find it interesting that I went to the doctor's office and they check your temperature before you can go into a doctor's office. And a lot of places you go that they check temperatures. And I think that's one thing they can check. I don't know.
So how many thermometers do we have?
We talked about that this morning, and Hammer is not here, but I know we ordered more than 100. I don't know the
That's all I
exact
know
number.
too. I was gonna ask Hammer, because we had, like he said, we had talked about it already.
Yeah, so I know we have a bunch. Here's what's going on in my mind. Tracy said something that prompted a thought, because the reason we're congregating outside is because the original navigation to change plan came out. You were supposed to check temperatures outside. And we are worried about the weather, and they know that there's gonna be some conditions when it's raining or whatever, you're not able to do that. But there may be some other ways that we haven't thought of as how that can be done. Maybe, this doesn't have to happen now. That's what I'm gonna say. So maybe it would be in the best interest of all if we tabled it at this time, because it's not a do or die thing, and we do have a process. I haven't heard any complaints about the process. I just don't know that we're meriting the cause of what we initially thought we were going to do, and I guess I wanted to make sure you understood that. We have an attendance of almost 7,000 students every day, probably more like 6,000 when you count in absences or whatever, and we're checking that many temperatures, and we're only seeing those results. I mean, that's pretty obvious right there by itself, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some value and that there aren't some metrics that it could have worth too.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
I was having a little bit of a problem hearing. So was Sean saying that the CDC is no longer recommending temperature checks and Ford Health Department? Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Okay, so I mean, I am in favor of not doing the temperature checks. I'm in favor of doing away with them. But my question would be then, is what's the benchmark? Because if we're only hovering at around 20 positive tests, at what point do we say, okay, we're at an acceptable number? We're no longer going to do something such as temperature check. So where's the threshold there, or is it just now total eradication? Is that the benchmark before we start moving back to some kind of normalcy, where there's a complete eradication of COVID-19, which is just going to happen? So that would be my question. I mean, we're hovering right at around 20, so where's the benchmark where we no longer do something like that?
Ryan, you're referring to temperature checks?
Yes, yeah, I won't go down the mask road. I'm just talking right now about temperature checks.
And I don't have a benchmark to where we have to stop or continue either way. All I have is the numbers that we know so far, that we're not seeing the temperatures as being a factor in the schools, and so that's why we're asking to, and because of the fact the CDC came out and said they no longer recommend that we do temperature checks, and the Ford County Health Department has not been in favor of them from the beginning, and several doctors have also mentioned that they're not in favor of us doing them either, and so that's why I don't have the benchmarks for the whole thing though.
Did you hear that, Ryan?
I don't know if that was necessarily directed at Sean, because I'm in favor of his recommendation. That was just a quick general.
I think we're going to go more by what the health department tells us or the state tells us, KDH, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, more than what our own benchmarks are. So it would depend on what they come up with as far as benchmarks.
Sean, can you have?
Well, I'm
Go
in favor of the recommendation.
Could you have them clarify if it's no temperature checks at all, or just the way we were doing them because we were congregating and they didn't like that fact? Because from your statement earlier, I kind of got the impression that because we were gathering people together, they didn't like that. It was more of a threat than the temperature check itself. So if it's just our tactic we have to change, or they just don't recommend temperature checks no matter what?
I don't know for sure about the CDC, but I know the county just doesn't see the benefit in doing them because of the cases in Ford County and what they're seeing. The temperatures are not a big factor in identifying COVID people. So they've talked a little bit about the gathering also, like what you're saying, but just the benefit not being there is the biggest part.
Well, I think it's going to be, you know way more than I do on this, but to change tactics, because back when I was teaching, if you're at grade school level, the kids are going either into the gym or into the lunchroom or sitting on benches out in the hallways before they go into classrooms. I mean, that may be different nowadays. Same thing with middle school. It's not like all the kids come to school, they go right to their classrooms. High school, same thing. So, I mean, once they're in the building, I mean, you could have the teachers do it first period, but you're talking, there's a lot of kids roaming and going, without the temperature check before they come in. So I'm just thinking that it would be very difficult to change the tactics, how we do that, to catch everybody before they're in the buildings. But I might be thinking not here and not thinking outside the box. So.
A lot of places you go check the minute you open the door to go into the establishment, you're checked. I don't think they must be doing it for a reason, so, the doctor's office did it, so.
Well, I would agree with what the CDC is recommending and what the Ford County Health Department is recommending. But I think you also need to be flexible, because if we start seeing an increase or something, then it may be something that we need to be putting back into play. So,
Anybody have any further questions for me?
I think we should keep it, I really do. I think that's one of the few things we have, and we need to use what we have to check students.
Jamie, do you want to weigh in?
I would say I see is, even if it, to me, it's, if it doesn't catch COVID, I don't know, but the strep and the flu, not because it's been around a million years and kids are gonna get it, and we're not gonna stop that. The only thing I see as a benefit to it is that they don't have to quarantine and go get tested right away. You know, I guess they're gonna have to do the way of things, I don't know. That they don't give it to the other kids in class and then they have to, I don't know. I'm ready for it all.
Because that still is the process, right? What she, like if there is a temperature, then they have to be tested for COVID.
We don't tell anybody that they have to be tested for COVID. We tell them they should contact their physician and ask them if they should be tested.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion to vote on this, or do we want to table it?
I'll move for approval.
Okay.
I'll second it.
We've got a motion by Ryan and a second by Jeff. All in favor of the change in operations plan? 1, 2, 3, 5. All opposed? 2.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Lisa, what was it? I'm sorry.
5 to 2 in favor.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up, we are ready for the update on the demolition of the old administration building.
Okay, and in Hammer's absence, I'm going to share the information that was given to me, and the right-hand man, Chris Myers, is here to make sure that everything I say is accurate and correct. But I just wanted the board to be aware of the fact that a lot of things are going on. At last board meeting, we did approve a final list from the Ford County Historical Society for them to take items. They did take those items. There was some confusion over the main entryway. There was an interior and an exterior, and we talked about the exterior and took action that that wasn't going to be possible. And then that interior kind of got overlooked. And just to make things easy, we went ahead and also included that, and Chris's staff did a great job of getting that taken down in between where the project was. And they were able to set it aside and give the Ford County Historical Society amount of time to come pick that up, and so that was taken care of too, so I think we've done well. Next, the abatement portion of the project for asbestos is now complete, and after the abatement, they went in and tried to do some sorting of wood from the concrete and mortar and blocks, and they sorted as much wood as they could, my understanding, which means that about next week, I believe, you'll see a heavy crane come in and they'll start taking down some of the brick. I mean, the demolition process will be underway.
Yeah, it will start on the outside and then work its way in.
Start on the outside and work its way in. And so with that will come some attention, and I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of what was going on. It is on target. It is obviously a large project, and things are going well time-wise. Anything I missed, Chris, or need?
There's a safety barrier all the way around for safety.
If you've been down that street, you've seen there's, and the Hutton did get city approval for that to take place, and the fencing goes all the way around the building to try to keep things up. We did have an interesting situation that I want to talk about publicly without naming names, but we did have what I believe was a attempt for someone to take a lot of material, claiming that they were with Hutton. At this office, we gave them a number to Hutton, and they called and said they were with Hutton. And Hutton said, "What do you mean you're with Hutton? I am Hutton." And that's kind of how we caught it. And it's just amazing what people won't try to do. So that makes that security fence even more positive for us to protect, because in the rights of that contract, that material is property of Hutton now. and it's their responsibility. And so that happened as well. How long do you think it will take, Chris, once they start the demolition?
They're thinking around 1st of December, hopefully.
Okay.
Everything goes right.
Okay. So it's no small project.
They're not saving any of the brick or the outside brick, they're not saving anything, just,
No.
It's all going to the
okay.
Very good.
All right, that's the update.
Okay. Next up is the approval to purchase phones for the Southwest Kansas Area Co-op District 613 for the new administration building.
Okay, and this item was added on Friday, a day in which I took off, and so I have had conversation about this previously, and this bill has been sitting around, and we needed to give attention to the bill, so Hammer went ahead and put it on the agenda, and then took a week's vacation. That's kind of nice.
Perfect
Smooth,
timing.
wasn't it? That was a smooth plan. But here's the bottom line. When 613 was given that office space, the phone system had not been put in yet because they didn't know where the walls and how the desk would set up and all of that. And I believe just to make our plans work out, they left that price off until they knew, because it was hard to predict at the time. And so that obviously to run an office you have to have phones and you have to have a system. By his own acknowledgement, Hammer has not sat down with 613 to really factor this out, but it's pretty easy to think about. We have a 10-year lease with the co-op. If they decide in 10 years that they're not going and they paid for the phones, they're going to take the phones and leave. And we will be left with having to purchase the phones over again. If we make it the responsibility of 613 again, we're still paying 64% of that purchase, because that's our percentage of the co-op. And so my recommendation is that we keep it clean. It is part of the building, which is part of the lease that we said we would do, and then those phones are part of our system.
I agree.
So
That makes the most
that's
sense.
my
to me.
recommendation.
Yeah.
I make a motion for approval.
Okay.
Purchases for phones.
All right, I'll get the names right this time. Motion by Tammy, second by Tracy. All in favor? All right, 7-0. Dr. Dirksen, count day?
Okay, the last thing that I just wanted to give you a little information, and I believe in your folder you do have some handouts on the count day. That one sheet is just a data point. It's the one I will be talking about. If you want to pull it out, it looks like this. Just has each grade. Ray has a terrific program set up, and we get a daily count. I've given you the information on what was technically referred to as the count day, September 21st. Also in your packet, I gave you a thing that's always fun to look at, and that was the classifications that also came out on Friday. And the classifications show that Dodge City High School is the 6th largest high school in the state. There are several communities that have more than one high school. And so by school size, they would be larger, but that just gives you a proportion of how we are as far as ranking in the state. To have the 6th largest high school, that comes with a great responsibility. On the other end of the spectrum, if you look at 1A, how do you have school with, what is it, 14 kids?
22.
10?
10, yeah, 14 and 10. That gets to be amazing when you look at that. So, yeah, all the way down to 10. On the handout that I gave you, I want to make note of this, and I chose to only give you this year's, but I compared it to last year. And I want you to know that our enrollment is down, which I think you're going to hear from most districts, that their enrollment is down. Interestingly enough, most of our enrollment is down at the lower grades. I think every grade is down some, but most of our numbers that we lost are in the lower grades. And there's a couple of reasons for that, I believe. And if I can back up a second, also in this sheet, we do include Sacred Heart students. So when you're looking at total numbers down, the students that go to Sacred Heart are our kids, and they end up at our high school. So we always keep track of that, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But you do have to exclude that. And I think it's interesting that their enrollment went up this year, 10. So just considering that. The other thing I was going to say on the elementary, we had a bubble of fifth graders last year that was our largest class. I think last year it was at 565. I think this year it's at 541 that are now sixth graders. And so what that did is that moved that number up to those upper grades where I'm telling you they didn't lose as many. And also what that did, just so you know, is that put pressure on the middle schools on enrollment size. Both of our middle schools are very nearing what we call capacity, 779 and 782. And another fact that I want to share is I have twice a week I have a Zoom with schools our size. Emporia, Hutchinson, Mays, Andover, Salina, and I'm sure there was others that I didn't write down, but those are the ones I got written down, all reported losing enrollment and all reported lower grades more than at the upper grades. I think a lot of parents chose other alternatives and didn't want to send their children to school, and I think that was statewide, if not nationwide. So these are just data points because every digit that is on here at this time has to be verified for FTE and all that. So this is just a base point for you, if you will. But I thought those were some interesting facts, and just wanted to be very upfront with you on these numbers.
You know, I read it, I don't know if it was in the Washington Times or the New York Post or the New York Times, but they're writing articles now about the lost children. And they say we've lost tens of thousands of children who are somewhere, but their schools can't account for them since last March, when everything shut down. That to me is the biggest tragedy that I can imagine.
I think that's a good point.
That we as a country have lost that many children and we can't find them. They're out there, but we don't know where they are.
I would conclude with, I feel like our numbers are strong. If we can get through this, like Jamie was talking about, I believe they will come back and will be even stronger. But obviously, the position we're in, when you look at that classification and all that, we're still in a strong position and intend to continue so. And just thought that was more information that you needed to know.
And how many are we down, you said, this year, total district?
Going by last year's number and this year's number, it looks like we're down right around 198. Tammy agrees with me, got a thumbs up on that. So I think in calculating numbers across the board, that includes our alternative ed, that includes our Bright Beginnings, and if you notice, Bright Beginnings, I'm comparing numbers, you aren't, but Bright Beginnings is where we lost a lot of numbers. And
those kids are there.
Yeah, I think just the younger kids that didn't want to come. I think it was down in the 70s somewhere. So.
I wondered last time we had a big drop. Is this just COVID, or was there another time in the last 2 decades that we've had a big drop in?
Anybody?
Nobody?
Lisa and I 10 years, but you're 12 years.
Well, that's why I just thought somebody said,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
No, I don't remember. Don't know the historical presence of that.
I remember one year Alan said we were flat.
Or even a spike, if we've had a big spike anytime.
Yeah. I can safely say I believe this is directly related to the COVID situation.
I'm like you, I believe they're out there.
Yep.
But they're just not here.
Yeah, I know they're out there because I've stopped and talked to several moms. I mean, I want them back, and I want it to, for all the right reasons, but I feel like kids need to be in school, and I feel like they benefit from all the things we have to offer, so. But that's a parental choice, and they have that right, and I just want them to know we care.
Okay. I believe that we have someone that would like to address the board. I would like to tell you beforehand, we don't typically have public comments at our noon meetings because we keep them shorter so people can get back to work. We do have public comments at our evening meetings. You can always request to speak to the board at any meeting that you'd like, but we'll give you a few minutes today since you already came.
I did call ahead and I was told I didn't have to be on the agenda to speak, but I would have, if I would have during the lunchtime, I did. So good afternoon, and I have written everything I want to say down because I do want to be considerate of your time, and I'm a yapper, so I don't want to get off course. So my name is Carmen Valverde, and I have a student at USD 443. My other student attends Sacred Heart. I just wanted to give you a little background. I'm a doula, a childbirth educator, and a medical and legal translator. And my job right now as a doula is to teach families about informed consent, informed choice, shared decision-making, patient rights, and common procedures and alternatives when they are pregnant and giving birth. I have gathered opinions from the community, and while some have a preference on whether they wear a mask and some do not want to wear a mask, some do want to wear a mask, the majority do not see the effectiveness or need to wear a mask. They agree it is up to the families and individual if they wear a mask. Many of the people I have spoke with did not want to appear before you today because they are afraid of being singled out and have actions taken against them, especially if they have ties to USD 443 or are employed by USD 443. With that said, I have the following questions for the board, and I would like facts, not opinions, just so I can have this for my records. This is the following data that I would like to know. Can the board please identify the medical necessity for these interventions? What scientific evidence does the USD 443 board have that would demonstrate any medical necessity for the medical interventions? And by medical interventions, I mean temperature checks and masks. So what specific data are you guys going by that you made this decision?
Your opportunity to speak to the board allows you the chance to share your opinions or facts that you want to talk about. It is not a question and answer session for the board.
Okay, all righty. I'll do the following in a non-question format, just as general information. So in order to make or have someone do a medical intervention, you also have to prove medical efficacy for the intervention, especially when the manufacturers of these masks include a disclaimer on the packaging material stating that the masks are not intended to prevent the spread of disease. So therefore, I was wanting to get the scientific evidence that the school is relying upon to demonstrate the medical efficacy and necessity for the intervention. So the other question I had, but I guess I'll have to look for that elsewhere, is where were the funds and resources approved, and what were they to engage in the activities other than schooling the children? By what authority is the school using public money and resources to engage in medical interventions or acting in capacity of protecting the students or public health from health risks when these actions are not part of the charter? So that would have been my next question. And then can the USD 443, and maybe I can find these on the website, they probably should be public, please disclose the amount of funding it has received under the guise of any public emergency. I would like to know how much money has been allocated and who approved this funding and allocation. So USD 443 has no ability to indemnify anyone who acts upon its medical intervention against the risk it is claiming to prevent. So the board is not insurable and has no insurance that would compensate students or parents who would suffer any adverse health consequences that the board is claiming will be prevented by following these medical interventions. So has there ever been has the school published any insurance binder for the requiring coverage of using public school resources to engage in medical interventions affecting the public? And the next thing is, what laws has USD 443 been exempt from, including but not limited, for example, practicing medicine without a license, imposing medical interventions without training or insurance, and violating longstanding OSHA safety regulations, violating civil rights. So what legal authority was given that is contrary to longstanding property rights regarding informed consent that now allow the school to legally ignore the rights to informed consent? Isn't the purpose of informed consent intended to protect the public health, and why is it now being violated? Since gathering vital statistics, aka temperature checks, that's what it is. Do you guys have the appropriate data gathering system that is compliant with HIPAA to protect my family's privacy of these vital statistics that are taken? And then what is the nature of the emergency which the school purports to act, and why, and by what criteria is there any kind of emergency? And if there is such an emergency, why were the children permitted to return to school at all? So, is the board aware, and do you understand that no one may be forced, coerced, or compelled to accept medical interventions without full voluntary consent, under full disclosure, and that acting without the informed consent of the affected parties, harmful or otherwise, is unlawful and unethical? Can the USD 443 please confirm that we are not participating in any epidemiological experiment? And if we are, have such experiments been approved by the FDA? Is the school board aware that the following statements are on the most WHO, or World Health Organization, advice on the use of masks in context to COVID-19 interim guidance, June 5th, 2020? And this is what they said. At the present time, the widespread use of masks by healthy people in the community setting is not yet supported by high quality or direct scientific evidence, and there are potential benefits and harms to consider. There are currently no studies that have evaluated the effectiveness and potential adverse effects of universal or targeted continuous mask use by health workers in preventing transmission of SARS-CoV-2. Potential harms, disadvantages, the likely disadvantage of the use of masks by healthy people and the general public include potential increased risk of self-contamination due to the manipulation of face masks and subsequently touching eyes with contaminated hands. Potential self-contamination that can occur if non-medical masks are not changed when wet or soiled. This can create favorable conditions for microorganisms to amplify. Potential headache and/or breathing difficulties depending on the type of mask used. Potential development of facial skin lesions, irritant dermatitis, or worsening acne when used frequently for long hours. Difficulty with communicating clearly, potential discomfort, a false sense of security leading to potentially lower adherence to other critical preventative measures such as physical distancing and hand hygiene. Poor compliance with mask wearing, in particular by young children. Waste management issues, improper mask disposal leading to increased litter in public places, risk of contamination to street cleaners, and environment hazard. Difficulty communicating for deaf persons who rely on lip reading. Disadvantages for or difficulty wearing them, especially for children, developmentally challenged persons, those with mental illness, elderly persons with cognitive impairment, those with asthma or chronic respiratory or breathing problems, those who have had facial trauma or recent oral maxillofacial surgery, and those living in hot and windy environments.
Excuse me for interrupting. We typically give 5 minutes time, and you are at that. Are you almost done? Or?
I had one more point actually on this one, and then I was going to be about done. And this one is actually off your USD 443 handbook. It's your non-discrimination statement. And on there you say you don't discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, religion, military status, primary language, and or disability. And under disability, there are many medical conditions that are under that umbrella term. And there are some for which some doctors will not give what you would call an exemption, that there is no law requiring the mask, so technically you don't need an exemption to not consent to a medical intervention. So those were the points I wanted to bring up, because sometimes all we hear are the news, and sometimes those news, their job is to hype people up and instill fear. But if we take a look at all the data that's been put out there, you will see that even if they say, oh, we recommend the mask, once you look further into it, you will see they say there is no high quality data. So they are giving us recommendations with no data. and have our teachers been trained to take temperatures? They don't have a medical license. If I took someone else's temperature, that's actually my job as a doula. I only provide emotional and informational support to a woman. I never do vaginal exams, temperature checks, nothing, because I don't have a medical license. So why are we having teachers do the temperature checks? I totally agree. A nurse can do the temperature check. She's registered with the state to do so. And I would like to be put on the agenda for your next meeting so that I could have more time to speak with you about this, because I have another forum where I would like you guys to take responsibility if something does happen to my daughter. Because I see her, she never has a running nose. And now that she wears the mask, she comes home and I see nasty boogers on it. So if I'm not consenting, how am I supposed to take their responsibility? Those that are forcing this should be taking responsibility. Because if I don't want my daughter to do this, she can't come to school. And I don't want her doing the online learning. That is just way too much time on the computer. So is that being forced or compelled to either show up with a mask or not show up at all? Thank you.
Okay, that is all that we've got. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay,
I'll second it.
we have a motion by Tammy, a second by Pamela. All in favor?
Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone.